Triangle piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Also going to go through what you should know beforehand, the piercing experience, healing the piercing, jewelry, living with the piercing, and what happens if you don't want it anymore and you decide to take it out. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 38. So you might want to stick around. For those who are new to the channel, welcome to the channel. Hope you're finding the videos helpful, informative, all the fun stuff that we like to make them be. But you might not know who I am, especially if this is your first video. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 27 years. What we're going to talk about today is the triangle piercing. This is a female genital piercing, and as a disclaimer, if you're easily offended or you don't want to listen to me talk about female genitalia, or maybe it's not appropriate at your age to be learning such things, please find another video to watch. There are plenty of those on this channel relating to tattooing, piercing, and other forms of body art that have nothing to do with female genitalia or anything that might be considered sexual. For those that think they're going to get something tantalizing and some type of gratification sexually from this, I'm sorry to disappoint, but you're going to be disappointed. This is solely for educational purposes, for those that are considering getting this piercing done, are curious about it, or maybe their partners are, and that's it. Nothing fancy, nothing exciting, nothing tantalizing. So, what is a triangle piercing? Obviously, because it's on YouTube, I can't show you photos, but basically it is a piercing done horizontally, usually done with rings, just at the bottom or base of the clitoral hood, through the labia minoris, so that it sits basically behind or underneath the clitoris, pushing it outward or, I guess, supporting it. Now, this is done through a triangle of tissue that not every female has. In fact, it's a pretty rare piercing for that standpoint. I generally probably, for every one of these I do, I probably turn away at least 4 to 5 people. It's just a rare piercing for that reason. You have to have the correct anatomy. You have to have that hollow spot right there, because we don't want to pierce into anything that might be connective nerves or tissue that may damage sensation. The first recorded triangle was created by Lou Duff at Gauntlet back in 1990, I believe, and was done by Elayne Angel. This piercing is a complete and utter modern invention. It isn't a really popular one, and it's one that you're gonna find in the wild not very often. I have done, 10 or 15 of them in 27 years, so that'll give you kind of an idea. They're a very rare piercing and a very advanced piercing. It's important that you have somebody that you know definitely understands human anatomy, understands the female anatomy, and has experience with this particular piercing. So now let's move on to the pros, the advantages, the things that make you go, yeah, that's the piercing for me. Starting with number 1, increases sexual pleasure. Because this piercing is located below the clitoris, through that tissue, it kind of pushes the clitoris out and supports it to make it easier to stimulate. Also, the jewelry, I've heard, rubbing against the area can feel kind of, can increase sensation also. Now, as I always say with genital piercings, it may make it better. It probably isn't going to make it worse, but it'll definitely be different. Expectations need to be in that range. If you are having issues and you think this is going to be the solution for said issues, there's no way to guarantee that that's going to be the case. Number 2, this piercing does have a long history of healing. It is an established piercing. This is not super experimental or cutting edge. This is a piercing that has a long track record. Number 3, Easy heal, not prone to infection, because there's a lot of blood activity in that area. It's very rare to see infections in genitals. As long as you take care of them properly during the healing process, they're generally a fairly easy heal and not prone to infection or other problems. Number 4, doesn't affect lifestyle as much as other piercings. Unlike piercings that get a lot of contact with like bedding, etc., this particular piercing does not really alter how you eat, how you talk, how you sleep. Other than maybe a slight wardrobe change in dealing with the bleeding for the first week or so, it usually isn't a big change in your life. In fact, unless you remember you have it, you probably won't even notice it. And the last one, number 5, easy to conceal, meaning that if you work in a professional business or you have a situation where you live in a very conservative area of the planet, or have conservative social acquaintances that are going to be freaked out if you have a lip piercing, this is a piercing that you can easily hide. The only people that will probably know about this piercing are those that you tell about the piercing, those that you're intimate with, possibly some people in the healthcare industry, and, of course, that odd occasional thing where they might see it in like a locker room or a shower locker room. Other than that, this is a piercing that's easy to hide, and it's not going to affect your job or your social standing. Before we move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that make you go, nope. If you like the video, find it helpful, find it informative, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you like it, because I like it when you like it. If you haven't already, subscribe. Hit the notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. If you have questions or you would like to share your experiences with this particular piercing or what have you, please leave a comment. Now let's move on to the cons and disadvantages, things that say, not for me. Starting with number 1, anatomy. As I mentioned earlier, this is a piercing that you have to have the correct anatomy for. I've had clients that were kind of on the borderline where we, basically the way we evaluate it, and I'll go into this again, or maybe we'll just go into it here, is usually we pinch down on the area and kind of feel back and forth. If we don't feel anything between that tissue, then it's safe to do. And it has to be kind of a hollow kind of area. If we feel anything in there that feels meaty or thicker, we tend to say no, we'd rather not. Because there's always a possibility that there's nerve groupings or endings in there that could cause loss of sensation. So whenever in doubt, I will be very conservative with this particular piercing. You really have to have the correct anatomy to pull it off. The other thing is it works better with women that are heels. Now, I've said this in videos in the past, and people have like scratched their head and said, what is he talking about? Basically, female genitalia kind of come in 2 extremes, and that is the valley, where the outer labias are more pronounced and everything's kind of more enclosed, and then the hill, where everything is more outside the body. The labia minoras are very visible, and it's almost flat where the outer or labia majoras are. Everybody's kind of in between the 2 of those. Some more extreme, some less extreme. With this one, having the genitalia more in the heel area or more outside the body and not kind of tucked inward is going to be more comfortable, because generally we put circular jewelry in there or barbells, so that twisting back and forth or putting pressure one way or another is not going to be very comfortable. So you're better off if you have that type of anatomy. And then we go on to number 2, which is always number 2 on pretty much every genital piercing video I ever do. And that is, even after the piercing heals, you are going to be more acceptable to STDs, meaning that you need to practice safe sex every time you switch a partner, which is something you should be doing anyway. Number 3, may lose its effect. Now, this, I think, has more to do about the newness of the sensation than it actually has to do with anything numbing out or not being as spectacular as it once was. As humans, when we experience new sensations, new activities, new etc., especially when they're involving sexual activity or sexual intercourse or what have you, we tend to be more excited. It's more fun. It's more unusual. It's more driving. As time progresses and that sensation or that event or, well, let's face it, that partner becomes more normal to you, you start to lose some of that excitement. I think that is the case more so than it's numbing out. And it's the same pretty much with old genital piercings. And even nipple piercings on some people. Number 4, and this is a huge one. If the piercing is done and you have the incorrect anatomy for this particular piercing, it can cause nerve damage. That's why it's very important that you seek out someone who is extremely experienced with this particular piercing. And the last one, number 5, this thing will probably bleed off and on for anywhere from 1 to 5 days. They do bleed more than other piercings, and usually for longer, just basically because there's a larger blood supply there than in other parts of your anatomy. Before we move on to things you should consider or look for, we have a merch store. We sell T-shirts. We sell fanny packs, beach towels, throw pillows, various different designs, various different colors, etc. Check out the link in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below so you can take a quick peek. Things to look for, things you should consider before getting it done. The number one thing is that the piercer is very experienced with this piercing, or at least doing a lot of female genitalia piercings, has a very broad knowledge or very good knowledge of female anatomy. And you should verify this. If you can find a way to verify whether or not they've done them in the past through their photos or actual accounts, that's even better. And the piercer should be informative, professional, and make you feel comfortable. Understand that you're going to probably expose a part of your anatomy that you don't just walk down the street and expose to just perfect strangers. So it should be somebody that you feel comfortable with and, isn't weird, creepy. You know what I'm talking about. The piercer should give you a consultation, and during that consultation, they should talk about the risks involved, what it's going to take, the commitment on how to take care of it, aftercare, etc. They should also ask about any metal allergies that you may have, especially if they still use implant grade stainless steel or any material pretty much other than titanium. There should also be a discussion of any type of materials or surgical scrubs or anything else that you might have reactions to. I'm going to say this again. It should be somebody that you feel comfortable undressing in front of and exposing yourself to. There's no way to do the piercing through clothing. We can't, put a blind mask up or anything. We have to see what we're doing. And if you're uncomfortable with that or uncomfortable with that person, either find another piercer or consider maybe another piercing that doesn't involve this part of the anatomy. The other thing is wear something that's comfortable to pull up or move out of the way or take off. For example, do not wear the tightest jeans that you own and, lace up boots. Wear something that's easy to remove, like a skirt or what have you, that you can get to easily and you can cover up easier. We're going to generally do the anatomy check on it. Then we're going to go through paperwork and everything else. Then we're going to go through setup. Then we'll actually do the piercing itself. So there is going to be a period of time of anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes between that anatomy check and when we actually need you to be unclothed. So if you don't feel comfortable sitting there with your prizes hanging out, go ahead and wear something or bring something along to cover yourself up. We're going to be happy to let you do that because we want you to feel as comfortable as possible during the procedure. As I mentioned earlier, this piercing is usually done with circular jewelry. It varies. It depends on your anatomy. Usually it's a ring or catchy bead ring or a circular barbell. I have done them in the past with curved barbells. I don't like the way they flip-flop, or at least the client didn't because I wasn't wearing it. We have to have something that's kind of a little oversized so that it'll fit comfortably around the area and not stick straight out. We want it to lay flat. So that they can be a little bit on the big side, just to let you know that in advance. Something as large as a 5/8 ring. But, it's all based on your anatomy and how much tissue we're going through. Last thing is, does your piercer supply aftercare product? If not, what do they suggest and where can you get it? Most common thing you're going to find in the industry is sterile saline sprays. NailMed is probably the most consistent, most reliable. The piercing aftercare style that comes out in a fine mist is generally what I suggest. There's also the wound wash version, but with that, you usually have to do compresses or something else. So find out about that stuff in advance, if they sell it there, or they give it away with the piercing, or if they don't, where do they suggest going and picking it up? Because they may even know where it's the most affordable. With that out of the way, let's move on to the piercing experience, the actual thing that we do to make the piercing, right? It's like the cooking of the piercing. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to fill out a waiver, of course. Waivers will usually cover liability, of course, but they'll also cover things like, and the reason why you need to read them is the products they're using, including the jewelry, what the material's made out of. It's going to talk about any health issues you may have, any medication you may be on, and any type of controlled or uncontrolled substance that you may be on. So it's important to read through those. Don't just initial or check them off. Actually read them, because you never know. There might be something they're using that you are unaware of. Once the waiver's signed, we're all set up. The first thing we're going to do is disinfect the area with some type of surgical scrub. Once that's done, we will mark the piercing. Generally feeling around with the tissue. There's going to be probably a little bit of handling of the area, so be ready for that. That's normal. It's nothing weird. We just want to make sure that the clitoris is completely clear of what we're piercing. Now, I've done this in the past, both freehand with a needle receiving tube and with forceps. Personally, I kind of like the forceps because it definitely moves everything we don't want to hit out of the way. The disadvantage of it is if you have someone that's inexperienced or isn't paying attention, that they could possibly actually move the clitoris down into the area or some of the tissue. So it really depends on what works for your anatomy and this particular piercing and how your piercer generally does them. The piercing itself is very split second, usually over and done with before you even know it. I'll always have my clients do a breathing exercise. Well, not always, most of the time, where you take a deep and hold it and then blow, so that when you're in that relaxed state, we do the actual piercing so you don't tense up. Tensing up tends to make it more intense. A lot of tension going there. And it usually makes it a little bit more enjoyable. With genital piercings, it's generally a very sharp pain initially, kind of, it varies. Everybody's different. However, unlike other piercings, it's like, oh, God, that hurts, and then it is over. It always amazes people. They're, like, getting dressed, and they're getting ready to walk out, and sometimes I'll walk them outside or up to the front counter, and they'll be like, I can't believe I can't feel this right now. I just don't even notice it. So, jewelry is then inserted in clothes. This part probably is going to take the longest of the whole procedure, depending on the type of jewelry they're using and the type of closure. Once that's done, if there's any bleeding, and sometimes there's a little bit of slight bleeding, we will try to stop it as much as we possibly can, if not completely. Usually I try to get it done completely. Here's where buying a sanitary napkin or pad and bringing it with you can come in handy, because usually what I'll do is I'll either give you a piece of gauze, but if you have a pad with you, we'll just go ahead and do that, ask you to tell you can get dressed, and then we go through the aftercare explanation and etc. Usually, like I said, your aftermath effects with this, you're not going to have the throbbing and aching, but you're probably going to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness of the touch, inflammation, off and on, anywhere. Usually these don't do it too long, but they can last up to 5 days for certain people, depending on how healthy you are. And that's just a direct reaction of the trauma and damage caused by the piercing itself. It's how your body initially basically seals off all the blood vessels, sends in extra troops to fight off infection, and seals up the wound and begins the process of cleaning everything out and then starting the rebuilding. Now let's move on to the healing. This piercing can take anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks to heal. I generally suggest treating it like a healing piercing for a minimum of 3 months, meaning cleaning twice a day using sterile saline spray. When you get in the shower, at the end of your shower or bath, I usually suggest running water over the area. This is not only going to be to rinse off any excess soap or shampoo or anything else that may have collected in the area, but it also helps to kind of break up the discharge and remove it. Everybody's always really concerned about the crusties. What about the crusties? I can't get the crusties off. There is no reason for that. It is a part of the healing process. It is how your body kind of protects the wound during especially that initial healing. It's also how it gets rid of waste. Leave it alone. When your body's done using it, it'll get rid of it, just like it would be a scab if you had a cut. Don't pick it. Don't use Q-tips. Don't use cotton tip, toothpicks, Q-tips, or anything else in the area to get rid of, or your fingernails. Leave it alone. Also, do not rotate or move the jewelry during the healing process. Now, the other thing you need to do is you need to practice cross-contamination prevention. And that's going to involve washing your hands before handling the area, no oral contact or exchanging of bodily fluids on or around the piercing. And I usually suggest a minimum of 6 months. That doesn't mean you can't have sex for 6 months. That just means you need to use a latex barrier just to be on the safe side. Keep your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels. Do not submerge piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of, which is pretty much everything but your clean and well-maintained bathtub. Keep pets away from it. Do not let them sleep in the bed with you. Sexual activity whenever you're comfortable with it, where there isn't discomfort. If you notice discomfort, stop what you're doing and do something else. If you're using any type of lubricant, make sure that it's water-based. Also, stay away from anything that has spermicide, any type of warming gels or numbing agents or any of that stuff. Just water-based lubricants pretty much all I suggest as far as that stuff. Also, make sure that dental dams would be the other option. Make sure that everything you are using for your fun times is clean and disinfected. Now, bleeding can last up to 5 days. It's a good idea to wear a pad for the first week. And the reason being 3 things. First off, the bleeding. The second thing is it cuts down the amount of moisture in the area, which cuts down the amount of bacteria, which is going to reduce the likelihood of infection. And then the third one, which is it adds a little bit of cushioning while the piercing is going through its initial tender phase. It kind of helps to isolate it and cushion it and avoid problems. People often ask about clothing. The biggest thing I would stay away from is tight jeans with thick or stiff seams through the crotch area. They're not very comfortable from what I understand. Loose-fitting clothing is always best, especially in the first few days. Listen to your body. If it hurts to wear something, don't wear it. Exercise, if it's comfortable to do it, go ahead, have at it. The only thing I would suggest if you're using any type of equipment that is shared with the general public, clean it. Even if you're using it and only you are using it, it's probably a good idea to disinfect it. Now let's move on to jewelry options. Now, jewelry options are a little bit limited. We want something very basic with smooth edges, no point, sharp edges, or things dangling off of it. You got to keep in mind this is kind of an area where you don't want those things. Also, you don't want things that are going to get caught on things like clothing or your partner. Very basic is usually best. Circular jewelry is probably the most common used in this. Size-wise, at least a half inch is pretty much the standard. As far as the thickness, usually anywhere from 12 gauge or 14 gauge sometimes. 12 gauge is probably the most common. Now, the problem with smaller rings, if you get too small with the jewelry, is that it can cause a migration. It can cause the piercing to want to stick out and constantly get bumped, which could lead to rejection. You want something that lays naturally flat to the body. It isn't going to get in the way of everything. As I mentioned earlier, barbells and curved barbells can be worn in these. It really depends on your anatomy and what's going to fit comfortable in there. Try experimenting with them, but always hold on to the old jewelry in case you start to see problems. Now let's talk about living with a piercing. Living Leave the jewelry in at all times. Do not only remove the jewelry to replace it. It's not a bad idea to have your piercer change the jewelry for you. It can be difficult to see what exactly you're doing or finding those holes sometimes. It's much easier to come in, let a professional do it. Most of us don't charge for it. Then there's the ones that do. And even the ones that do, it might be worth the peace of mind not to have to deal with it. Avoid pressure, trauma to the piercing. A lot of people have this misconception that once a piercing heals, you can do pretty much anything you want to it. You can hang cement blocks off of it, use it to tether yourself for water skiing. And no, it is a hard piece of metal through soft tissue. Trauma to that piercing, no matter how long you've had it, is going to cause damage. It can cause a healed piercing to suddenly begin rejecting. It can cause it to tear through, which you do not want to experience. And also, it can cause it to just flare up out of the blue and become a angry little man or lady or what have you. As far as maintenance of the jewelry and everything else and the piercing, really all you have to do is just clean it like every other part of your body with warm water and soap, and it should be perfectly fine. Now, it's one of the last thing, what happens if you decide you don't want it anymore? Now, if it's going through the healing still, and there are any signs of infection or other problem, I really highly suggest that you see your piercer or doctor and have them take a look at it before removing the jewelry. The biggest issue or concern we have is if it is infected, the possibility that that infection would get trapped inside the piercing and require additional medical treatment. If it's healthy, even if it's healing, removing the jewelry is just going to cause the piercing to close. If it's still healing, it'll probably close fairly quickly. First, the outside holes will, in most cases, if it's during the healing process, the holes close first. Now, if it's been in there for a while or it's well seasoned, it may never completely close. Female genital piercings and some other male genital piercings, they don't ever close. They're just... because once that tissue's formed, it's staying there for good. However, if they do begin to close, they'll usually seal in the center and then fill in outward. So they may appear to be open, but the reality is once you hit center, there's no going through. Lastly, sebum. You're going to have that sometimes collect inside the piercing, and then when you squeeze it, it comes out and it looks nasty and it smells nasty. It is not a sign of infection. What it is a natural part of your body. It's something you produce, and for various different reasons, it tends to collect inside piercings, I think mainly because of scar tissue. Well, that's all I have to say about triangle piercings. I hope you learned something. I hope you found it informative. But until next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Thank you for watching, and check out one of these other videos.